Welcome everyone to the Diverse and Inclusive Messaging webinar. This webinar will be presented by myself, Bhumika Sood, and Niyati Raval. Throughout the presentation, we will give you the tools and skills needed in order to proficiently engage your audience and get them interested and invested in diverse and inclusive messaging. We want to make the engineering profession a more diversity-friendly place, using tons of research and looking thoroughly at studies made about diversity in engineering. We have collected data that we would like to share with you. So, from observing this data, we will provide you with some of the best practices to promote diversity and inclusion in engineering and in the world in general. Next slide, please.
So we have a couple of goals in place for today's webinar. We want everyone to be able to reflect on the diversity and inclusivity in engineering. Think about your workplace, and even back when you were an engineering student. How diverse and inclusive was your workplace or school? Did it reflect how Canada looks today, with a variety of people from different parts of the world? We will also be reviewing some insights available from research throughout this webinar. The research will reveal how, as a society, are we successful at making engineering a diverse and inclusive profession, and may lead to possible solutions to our problem. We also want to discuss those insights through personal experiences. Finally, we want to provide tangible ideas and calls to action that may be used by you today.
So before we start, we just wanted to let you all know a little bit about us. So we at Engineers of Tomorrow do strategic engineering outreach through which we hope to achieve the goal of shifting the public's perception of engineering. And our team at Engineers of Tomorrow consists of Erica Lee Garcia, our venture lead, Rebecca White, our operations manager, and this summer, Niyati and I, Bhumika, had the amazing opportunity of interning with EOT, and we have been working on numerous projects and helping out with various initiatives, such as the EIR program.
So now it's time for you to reflect on your past experiences. Have you been a part of efforts to improve diversity in engineering? Please use the chat box to respond, or if you have anything to add to this conversation. But Bhumika, have you done anything specifically or have been a part of efforts to improve diversity in engineering in any way?
I think working at Engineers of Tomorrow and being part of doing the EIR program is sort of my way of helping out.
Hmm. And do you know if those methods have been successful?
Mm, I think definitely for sure. We're going to show in our presentation that how some of the methods have actually been successful.
Nice. Does anyone else have anything to add? So I would say that as EIRs, all of you are doing something by participating in the EIR program, and that's a great start. Another thing that we want you to reflect upon is, how do you feel about the lack of diversity in engineering? If you have anything to add to the conversation, please use the chat box below. Does it affect you personally, and what does it mean to you? So I'll just share a little bit about my story. So personally, I came from a high school and a neighborhood with a large brown/Indian population, and I was surrounded by a lot of different ethnicities and cultures. When I came to Waterloo for engineering for my undergrad, I saw that there were a couple of different ethnicities, but not to the same extent as my high school. It seemed like a different environment to me. And personally, I feel that the engineering workforce does not accurately depict what society has to offer or how Canada's population looks like today. And we can work towards making it more diverse and inclusive by doing things such as the EIR program. So Claudio says, because of a shortage of engineers, I've been doing just about everything humanly possible to get people to enter the field. That's great. Anyone else have anything to add? All right, we're going to move on for now, but if anyone else has anything to add, we'll be reading out the comments as people are typing them in.
All right, so let's talk about diversity. So the textbook definition of diversity is the inclusion of individuals representing more than one national origin, color, religion, socioeconomic stratum, sexual orientation, etc. But in simpler words, it means to make everyone feel like they belong no matter who or what they are. And understanding that every individual is unique and is deserving of your acceptance and respect. Especially in engineering, which has been dubbed as a male-dominant career, diversity is very important to achieve. Including more women and other underrepresented minorities will help make engineering a more diversity-friendly profession. Next slide, please.
So, the definition of inclusivity is an intention or policy of including people who might otherwise be excluded and marginalized, such as those who are handicapped, learning disabled, sexual minorities, and racial minorities. Now, there are many efforts put into place that are trying to increase gender parity into incoming engineering programs and even increase diversity. So it may not seem that as a society we are excluding anyone from coming into engineering, but there are definitely barriers that make it harder for some individuals to choose engineering as a profession. So we need to work together to remove those barriers so we can make it more inclusive and therefore also a more diverse field as well. Without inclusivity, we cannot have diversity.
So why should we have inclusivity? First of all, it is essential to prevent the continued underrepresentation of women and minority groups in STEM professions, and we need to promote inclusivity. Note that we are not just focused on one ethnic group, we're referring to any group that has been underrepresented. Every group has its own challenges and their own stories, and many of the interventions that we will tell towards the end of this presentation might help us overcome some of those challenges. Also, STEM professions will benefit from an inclusive and diverse environment, and this is not just about doing the right thing or doing it because it is a social justice argument. We have done research and found out that through studies done in work environments, diversity actually leads to better results for the company. We will be better off if we have a variety and range of skills in our society and in engineering. We need to create a friendly work environment where everyone feels welcome and feels included, which increases confidence and productivity in the long run. And also, if we start seeing engineering as a diverse career, we will have more equality in the STEM profession and more access to opportunities. Next slide, please.
So, why focus on diversity? Given our goal to effectively attract and retain diversity and inclusivity, we would like to know how to do it. So, we're going to put into practice what has been discovered in scientific research just as we do as engineering/eng tech people. And we'll be giving you some of the different practices throughout this webinar near the end of it.
Our hypothesis on diversity in engineering. So as I talked about why inclusivity is important, the engineering and technology professions will benefit from a more diverse perspective makeup. We will be able to solve more complex problems with a more diverse set of inputs, experiences, and skills. And we'll also be able to better serve society when we reflect it. Diversity is important for adding equality and access to opportunity as fairness and justice, and also as an imperative for success for engineering and their mandate. Also, if you're curious about diversity, check out this TED Talk by Werner Myers. Next slide, please.
So let's take some time to talk about the gender differences in a couple of different STEM fields. As we can see, engineering has the lowest percentage of women in the workforce with around 12%. The other fields have a larger number of females, but not as many when compared to men. We may not be able to tell how large the gender difference is in STEM fields, but looking at these stats, it is important to realize that there is a major difference. Now, you may ask yourself, why is there such a large difference? STEM fields and engineering fields specifically are male-dominated fields, and this type of culture can create barriers and deter females from choosing a field where they may feel unwelcome at times. Now, this is just one possible reason for the gender difference. We will be discussing more later on. We can try to improve these stats for the future by advertising inclusivity and diversity through the EIR program. You can have an impact by making sure the kids in your class all feel included and welcome through the activities that you do.
So here is a glance at a class of engineering students of the graduating class of 2011. And as you can see, the gender ratio here, it is not 50-50 at all. Next slide, please.
So let's take a look at the stats for the incoming female Waterloo engineering undergrads for 2012. So as we can see, the lowest percentages of female are in electrical and computer engineering at 10.8% and in mechanical engineering at 10.3%. And then the highest is in environmental engineering at 56.1%, and also, I believe, systems design engineering at 34.4%. And then overall, the total percentage of females in engineering undergrad programs was 21% at the University of Waterloo.
So here are the statistics that we calculated in 2017, shows the ratio of the women that were enrolled from each program. So as you can see, we have made some progress since 2012. The amount of women in mechanical engineering has skyrocketed, and also the amount of women in software, electrical, and computer engineering is also slowly increasing. One thing to notice is that from the stats in 2012, now when we look at the graph, we have more fields individually approaching that 50 average. But unfortunately, the percentage of women in the traditional engineering fields is still lagging behind. And the total amount of women is still very low, even though it has increased. Even in 2017, the amount of women in Waterloo engineering is still as low as 30%. But we do see that the amount has improved, which is a good sign.
So why are the numbers so different? We looked at numerous stats to see how gender is represented in engineering and STEM fields, and even talked about possible reasons. But now we will look deeper into some more reasons for the differences in numbers.
So through some research that we did, we found this data from a website called Science Daily. We found out that the number of women with STEM degrees is still not 50-50. And if you look specifically at the number of women in computer science, it is extremely low. So this gives us a pretty good observation that there is not enough diversity in this field.
So when we looked at the stats for Waterloo engineering for the different engineering disciplines, we saw that some engineering disciplines, such as biomedical engineering, had almost 59% female population, while others had as low as 10%. So we want to sort of understand why is there such a big discrepancy in the numbers, even within engineering and STEM fields themselves. So we went and took a look at a research done by Washington University on gender discrepancies in STEM. And the study focused on looking at 6 STEM fields: chemistry, biology, and math, which had one of the highest female enrollments, and physics, engineering, and computer science, which had a larger gender gap. By taking a look at the culture within each program, the study found 3 reasons that helps describe why there is such a large gender difference in some STEM fields, such as engineering. So the first one that the study said was one of the reasons was due to lack of pre-college experience. So from my personal experience in high school, I'd say around 4 or 5 of the girls in total in my whole high school chose engineering as a profession. And there were more males that chose engineering, but it wasn't a lot of the kids in my high school ended up picking life science as an undergrad. I'd say around half of the kids in grade 12. And I'd say that this is definitely due to lack of pre-college experience because a lot of kids didn't know what engineers did or what exactly engineers are and what they can do with that career in the future. So the lack of pre-college experience is something that we're tackling by through the EIR program. And if we can give them experiences when they're younger, then it can help them pick engineering in the future, which is what this program is all about. And another thing that they found was gender gaps in belief of one's abilities. And the third thing was the masculine culture that discourages women from participating. And this one I think is true because a lot of females that I talked to who ended up picking life science instead of like thinking about engineering often said that they feel that engineering is very male dominated and that they wouldn't be able to fit in that culture. So that was definitely one of the things that they told me. And so negative stereotypes about women's abilities and a lack of role models are factors that decrease women's interest in a field by signaling that they do not belong there. And this can also be you can also rephrase this in a way to talk about minorities as well, racial minorities. So negative stereotypes about women's abilities and racial minorities and the lack of role models are factors which can decrease women's interest in a field and also racial minorities' interest in a field by signaling that they don't belong there. And also, a quote from Science Daily was that early learning opportunities in STEM will only attract girls if they convey that girls belong in those fields as much as boys do. And again, this can be said. This can be said about racial minorities as well. So, yeah.
So here is another graph which is showing you statistics about people that have enrolled in a STEM program. So if you look at the brown bar, you can see that there are 33% males enrolled in a STEM program compared to 15% females, and that is less than half. And if you look at the race and ethnicities, we can also see that it is not equally diverse. Next slide, please.
So let's talk about stereotypes. Now we know that stereotypes can negatively impact and affect an individual. It can even deter them from choosing certain paths in the future, as they may feel that they don't belong there. Now, we're going to look into some different stereotypes in today's society and have a brief discussion on the matter.
So let's look at some very common misconceptions that you find in your day-to-day life. Well, the biggest misconception is that women and girls like to dress up, and this is always advertised. For example, women trying to look beautiful, doing makeup, wearing clothes, which are usually the color pink, etc. And it is shown in TV shows, movies, TV advertisements, billboards, etc. It is so prevalent around us that we think of it as normal. But the reality is, not all girls are like that, and it is not right to label every girl with this persona. Other stereotypes that you see and hear could be regarding someone's appearance. For example, if you look at these two young men, the person on the left can be dubbed as a criminal or violent, and the person on the right can be dubbed as racist or likes drugs, etc. Next slide, please.
So we just wanted to take a look at some of the stereotypes that were prevalent throughout, I'd say, Bhumika and I's childhood. So I remember that when I was younger, there were toys that were separated by color. So if you look at the Lego box right here, there was a separate Lego box made, which was pink, and it sort of emphasized how girls like pink and that stereotype. And this, I often saw or often would go into the pink section of the toy store and pick up toys that were pink. But that was because it was advertised to me that girls should like pink. And I don't know, maybe I did like pink at the time, or maybe it was because I saw it in the media all the time that girls wear pink and girls should like pink, that I ended up picking out pink toys and etc. Another thing that we see is even clothes perpetuate the stereotype that females aren't good at learning or aren't good at math or etc. So these were actual clothes that were made in the past, and they say, I'm too pretty to do math, or I'm too pretty to do homework, so my brother has to do it for me, or allergic to algebra. And even the clothes that we wore perpetuated those stereotypes that females aren't good at math or shouldn't go into fields that require math, kind of. And another thing is, when I was younger, I thought that my goal was to become a housewife in the future, because I saw that everyone that I saw sort of ended up. I saw that a lot of women ended up becoming housewives, or that's what I thought at the time when I was younger. So yeah.
So now from the previous slide and from everything Niyati talked about, this slide is a result of all the devotion and determination that we have put into breaking all of these stereotypes and norms and trying to make women feel like they're accepted and have an equal opportunity in this STEM career. Now we have girls pursuing math and science at school, getting ahead in class and becoming passionate about sports, etc. We've even seen an increase in women engineers, as we showed previously in our Waterloo engineering graphs. And also, we even have Barbies promoting STEM careers now. And one more interesting thing that we want to talk about is this picture of these two women wearing pink hard hats. We showed this in the previous slide also, but the reason that we're showing it now again is that in the last slide, we would say that they're being stereotyped as girly, but now we can say that a girl can wear pink if she wants to, but not because she is being forced to due to societal norms. Next slide, please.
So now we're going to be talking about stereotype threat. So imagine that you're giving a presentation to your classmates or coworkers and you find yourself stumbling through your words. You are seen through the lens of a negative stereotype, and then this causes anxiety and it affects your performance in presenting. So this is an example of what stereotype threat can do to a person.
So these are the three main stages of stereotype threat. First of all, being aware of the threat, and then buckling under pressure, and then as a result, underperforming and experiencing withdrawal. So how we can overcome this is through intervening and realizing what the stereotype is and take the pressure that we feel and redirecting it in a different way. So, and some more examples of stereotype threat can be if you've ever felt under pressure and felt like it made you choke in your performance. For example, if you were at school, sports, or work. So this choking experience is similar to when a person feels stressed while writing a test. It makes it hard for them to concentrate on answering the questions right because they are so anxious. So these are some relatable examples, and there are a lot of factors that contribute to this, and some of which we will talk about in the following slides.
So stereotype threat in action. So we're going to give you a scenario. So there are males and females that are participating in a math test. One test shows gender differences, so there's a high stereotype threat. So it shows that it shows the differences between how males did versus how females did. And then the other one shows no stereotype threat. So there's a low stereotype threat. So there's nothing revealed about gender differences in grades.
So let's look at the two scenarios. So first one, if the test shows gender difference in the past, the participants will think that men did better than women. So the characterization of the test explicitly evoked stereotypes about women's math performance. And in this condition, gender stereotypes are more relevant than when participants are told that there is no gender difference on the math test. Women experience stereotype threat and the possibility of being stereotyped when taking math tests, and this stereotype threat is especially likely to undermine performance on difficult tests. And if you look at the other scenario, which is no gender difference condition, then the gender stereotypes are not as relevant to their performance, indicating that women will do just as well as men. If we eliminate the stereotype threat about women and men, which is already in the air, we will reduce the possibility that their performance will be attributed to their gender. Next slide, please.
So let's take a look at the consequences of stereotype threat. So as Bhumika had said from the previous example, it can undermine performance. It can also trigger concerns about belonging, can lower engagement and retention, and it can threaten health as well. So just from my personal experience, I was in a group situation where I had mostly males as my group members, and I felt that if I had added anything to the conversation, that my opinion wouldn't be validated, and I was sort of in a stereotype that situation, and that sort of undermined my performance because I wasn't able to add anything to the table or to the group in any way because I was too scared to share my opinion at the time. So these are some consequences of stereotype threats.
So I want you to imagine two runners in a race, and both of them complete the preliminary race in the same amount of time, but one of the runners is wearing ankle weights. And then at the end, they have a final race where the runner, which was wearing the ankle weights, he or she removes them. So who do you think is going to win? Now, the runner with ankle weights should win because that person has more running ability. Even though first performances were in equal time, one did it with external pressure of weights holding him or her back. So this type of situation arises more often than you think. Not with ankle weights necessarily, but with other external and environmental pressures holding back people's performance. So for example, women and minorities have stereotypes about their abilities that can undermine their performance. So their performances with these pressures in place actually underestimate their true ability. And if these pressures were removed, they would perform even better. And this shows us that our assumptions about women or visible minorities having less ability is actually false. When we remove the biases that affect their performance, for example, in this case, the weights on their ankles, they perform every bit better or as every bit as well or even better. So we know that this gap is worth working to close because when we lose the performance of those students, we also lose their contributions to the engineering profession. And you, as an outreach leader, have the ability to start changing this. Next slide, please.
So now we're going to move on to sort of a discussion, the discussion part of the webinar. So we would like to start a conversation. So if you could use the chat box to answer any of the questions, it would be greatly appreciated. So some of the questions that we want to ask you are, have you ever experienced stereotype threat? When, with whom, what happened, how did it feel? Or how do you feel learning about these systematic factors that are holding back our efforts to make engineering inclusive and equitable? Is there a part of you resisting these insights? How? So if you have any answers to the questions, please write them down in the chat box. But Bhumika, do you have any insights to add?
Always in high school, I would notice that whenever somebody had to present, they would always feel nervous. And now that I know that there's stereotype threats, I assume that that's what contributed to that. And I feel like I've also experienced that.
Mm-hmm. I've definitely experienced underperforming due to sort of stereotypes being placed upon me, so I can relate to that.
Mhm.
Does anyone else have anything to add? So Claudio says he has experienced stereotype threat, and it's awful, and it definitely is. English wasn't his first language, and for being an engineer. Yeah, definitely. I feel that when English isn't your first language and you may have an accent when you're speaking, some people may perceive that that person isn't as smart or isn't able to do the task as better as someone else. Anyone have anything else to add? All right, well, we're just gonna move on, but if there are any comments afterwards, I'll be reading them out loud so we can continue our conversation on the issue.
All right, so now that we have talked about all the stereotypes and laid out all the observations, we are going to talk about strategies to overcome them and how to promote diversity and inclusiveness. So, these are some interventions for kids from kindergarten to grade 12, and these interventions are a way for us to spread our message and leave a lasting impression on the kids. Next slide, please.
So, role models and mentors. Mentoring opportunities happen naturally with female and minority leaders and facilitators. Whenever it's possible, let women and minority leaders lead activities and address your event participants. It is not necessary to mention why. Speak about your own diversity as well. Oh, sorry. Patricia says, in school, I remember feeling like everything I said out loud had to be perfect, or else I would be labeled as unintelligent. And that's true as well. I remember sometimes where I would refuse to raise my hand up or to add to the conversation because I felt that what I was saying wasn't clear or it wasn't coherent sometimes. But I know that if I had added something to the conversation, then it might have made the conversation more interesting. And that's definitely something I've experienced as well.
Me as well.
Mhm.
All right, so girly role models can backfire. So accentuating girly things to appeal to try and to appeal try to girls can negatively affect girls' motivation. For example, using a computer engineering Barbie or IBM's Hack a Hairdryer campaign, etc. So what you should do is choose relatable role models with accomplishments outside of work. Use examples that are not gendered. For example, from movies, music, the environment, creativity, solving big problems, etc. And from some research that we have done, it shows that exposure to feminine STEM role models actually decreases interest and confidence in STEM in middle-aged female students. Rather, when girls can relate to the role models, they see something in common with them. Eighth grade girls had a more positive attitude about scientists after meeting female scientists with accomplishments with lives outside of work.
So, reconceptualizing intelligence and ability, having the growth mindset. So, emphasizing the importance of effort, persistence, and gradual improvement over time instead of immediate results or innate ability makes a safer environment. You can also share your stories of your own failure and recovery. Mention the importance of continuing to improve and grow your brain. Say things like keep working or keep working slash working harder and you'll get it. Or say everyone makes mistakes at the beginning. You can also ask, what can you learn when things don't go well?
High standards and assurance that they can meet these standards. So, high standards indicate that students will not be judged and that they are capable of reaching these standards. So, for example, a kid may come up to you and say, "Oh, I can't do this. I'm not smart enough to be an engineer." So, instead, what you should do is don't give up on the kids who don't get it right away. Encourage them, but don't change the task for them. Say that I know this is a challenge, but I know you can do it. So try to get them to relate to you and sort of help them do it. Next slide, please.
Show that you value diversity. Being colorblind or gender blind can actually discourage minorities and women. So, show diversity in photos and in promotional materials. You should also talk about encouraging, embracing, and valuing diversity and say things like, we need everyone's contribution, join us, and that there is a place for you no matter who you are. Use inclusive language whenever you can, or actually through most of your classroom.
Model respect for women and minorities. So, as we previously gave you an example talking about ankle weights and showing you statistics, we know that when men or a majority group member or majority group shows respect for women and minorities, participants usually perform better. So you should have women and minorities speak, lead, or co-lead whenever possible and listen to what they have to say. Ask women and minorities for advice or help in front of your audience. Next slide, please.
So the take-home message for outreach leaders, or in this case it would be the EIRs, is that your participants may experience stereotype threat during your outreach event or your classroom visits in this case. So these are the summaries of the strategies that you can use. So provide positive, relatable role models and examples. Set and keep high standards. Promote a growth mindset instead of a fixed mindset. Demonstrate how diversity is valued. Model respect for women and minorities. Reframe anxiety and stress as normal, and provide opportunities for self-affirmation and reflection. And just to note something about the reframe anxiety and stress as normal, I think this is really important because as Bhumika and I have gone through our first year of engineering undergrad, we realized that a lot of people think that they need to be perfect and they need to get good grades or they're not important or they just don't feel of value. And a lot of people end up becoming stressed and they have anxiety as a result. And many people feel that it's not a normal thing. But when we talked to our peers and our other classmates, everyone said that they were stressed, and it was definitely a normal thing to feel. So reconceptualizing and reframing it as normal is definitely something that's important.
So here are some resources and references from where we got the data for our presentation. And if you're curious about large-scale education initiatives, you can check out the Project for Education Research That Scales, College Transition Collaborative, and Social Psychological Answers to Real-World Questions, etc. And the rest of them are just some references. Next slide, please.
So interventions and actions. So this was what we were talking about when we were referring to growth versus fixed mindset. So a fixed mindset is something along the lines of, I can't do this. It's not good enough. This is too hard. I don't get it, I made a mistake, and I give up. And a growth mindset is something along the lines of, I'm going to train my brain in math. Is this really my best work? I'll use some of the strategies I've learned. I don't understand yet. Mistakes help me improve, and this may take some time and effort. And I think getting kids to realize that having a growth mindset rather than a fixed mindset can lead to success in the future is important. And that's something that we want you guys to do when you go into your classrooms, is to emphasize that kids can grow in the future and they can always improve.
So here are some final thoughts for you. Your contribution matters, your energy level matters, and you are not alone. We are all dealing with our own biases.
So here are just some further resources. Telling Your Story, Aaron Rodgers, which is an Aaron Rodgers National Engineering Month webinar, the Moth Radio Hour, and other educational resources. You can subscribe to our monthly newsletter. You can also check out our Engineers of Tomorrow YouTube channel, which has our previous webinars from the past couple of weeks. So it has your Sharing Your Engineering Story webinar, the Intro to the EIR program for teachers, and the Intro to the EIR program for EIRs as well.
So we have reached the end of the presentation. We both want to thank you all for attending. So also connect with us on social media. We have Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter.
If you have any questions, Bhumika and I are both here to answer them. If you want to continue the conversation, we're also here as well. But other than that, thank you for attending.